afternoon and welcome to the February 21, 2024 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials webpage. And I thank you all for joining us. And with that, I call this work session of the City Council to order, and I will turn it right over to the city manager to introduce the first topic. Sarah, I had just kicked it over to you to introduce.
I'm sorry. Sorry, my computer had a hard time connecting.
I figured you hadn't quite heard that.
No, that's awesome. I thought you had just said I wasn't here yet, so apologies for that. We have two work sessions today. Our first one is an overview of our workout in River Road, Santa Clara, and I believe I'm just going to kick it over to Terry Harding to walk us through a presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. I'm Terry Harding. I'm a Principal Planner with the City's Planning and Development Department. Apologize for any echo that's happening there. I do have a presentation. I will give you the overview and then we'll have time for questions. So I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me. Yeah, I'll trust you're seeing that unless someone tells me you're not. Great. It's a little slow to advance. There we go. Okay, so today we'll review the community engagement process and neighborhood planning process that has taken about 6 years to get us to the place where we are today. We'll do an overview of the adoption package components, talk about the Planning Commission's recommendation, both Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions, and then your next steps for City Council and Board adoption, and have time for your questions. The Neighborhood Plan project is divided into 6 phases. The first 3 phases of the project, reaching out, visioning, and neighborhood priorities, focused on asking community members what they value in their neighborhoods now and about their hopes and visions for the future. The policy development phase focused on drafting policies that relate to the vision and neighborhood priorities. The draft policies are organized under 18 high-level goals. The action planning phase focused on drafting, evaluating, and prioritizing actions which the community identified as possible strategies to implement the neighborhood plan policies. In 2021, the Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners directed staff to move into the adoption phase and prepare the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan adoption package for community review. Between 2021 and 2023, the project went through a period of adjustment to align the plan with recent state legislation while implementing the most critical parts of the original vision. We've spent the last couple of years doing community outreach on a complete draft plan and code amendment adoption package. Today, we'll go over the results of last summer's outreach, the Community Advisory Committee and community organization recommendations, and the outcome of the Planning Commission process. There have been a number of challenges that have affected the project primarily since 2020, including the pandemic and a number of new state mandates. The Middle Housing Law, HB 2001, ultimately was applied by the Eugene City Council to all R1 zoned land equally across the city. And then more state legislation about climate-friendly housing and equitable outcomes was put into effect under the Climate-Friendly and Equitable Communities rules. Removing barriers to housing is a statewide priority like never before. In response, the plan and implementation tools were updated to comply with the new laws. The visions, goals, and policies remain largely intact, but some of the implementation items needed to shift. A more equitable approach to the land use code amendments was needed for the city to respond to recent state legislation. Instead of writing detailed requirements that apply to one area, our code tools are responding to an evolving state landscape that is focusing on addressing the housing crisis and moving toward more equitable outcomes for historically marginalized community groups. As far as the neighborhood planning elements, we have the neighborhood plan itself, which is a legally binding land use plan that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment. There are a set of neighborhood-specific code amendments, and there is an action plan. The action plan is a catalog of actions to implement over time. It is not intended to be adopted, and it is non-regulatory. As an example, it contains the Santa Clara Community Park at every level of these planning documents. There are vision statements related to parks and recreation, goals around parks and recreation, policies and actions that are implemented over time. And just about now, there is master planning and soon to be construction in the Santa Clara Community Park. As far as the adoption package itself, this looks like Metro Plan amendments to adopt the neighborhood plan and Metro Plan amendments to remove old sections of the Metro Plan pertaining primarily to bringing sewer service to the River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods. Originally, there was a proposal to repeal the 1987 Urban Facilities Plan, that is the existing refinement plan for the neighborhoods. However, due to public testimony and staff analysis, this plan is no longer proposed to be repealed at this time. So there's no picture of the 1987 plan on this graphic, but it is proposed to remain in place alongside the new neighborhood plan, as the two serve different purposes. And then there's a package of code amendments that go through the code amendment process that you're all pretty familiar with at this point. Within the neighborhood plan, there are 5 topic areas: community, economic development, land use, parks and natural spaces, and transportation. And for each of those topic areas, there is a vision statement developed with input from thousands of hours of community work and guidance of the Community Advisory Committee. There are 19 goals that are high-level statements. 18. There are 19 statewide planning goals. There are 18 goals in this plan, and a number of policies to implement each of the goals. Once adopted, this plan will serve as a guiding document to guide city and county decision-making over time and into the future. The Metro Plan is proposed to be amended to strike a section that I mentioned related to River Road and Santa Clara goals, findings, objectives, and policies. These are both from before 1987, before the previous refinement plan, and after. But as I mentioned, they mostly relate to providing sanitary sewer to the neighborhoods. There's one piece that we're proposing to keep and carry over into the new neighborhood plan, and that's a policy number 3 regarding annexation. And that is being lifted and put verbatim into the new neighborhood plan that explains the city's current approach to voluntary annexation. The package of neighborhood-specific code amendments are intended to meet these 3 goals: to implement high-priority land use policies and actions, to promote walkable neighborhoods through pedestrian-oriented design, and to shift to less auto-oriented land uses to align with citywide climate and transportation goals over time. This is most of the neighborhood in a zoning map, and I'm showing you this so you can see where the commercially zoned pieces are throughout the neighborhood. They're the light pink, and you can see that they're mostly along the River Road corridor, but there are also a couple of outlying areas on Maxwell and Irvington and along River Avenue, which we'll be talking about in just a moment. The code amendment proposals include a reduction in the allowable building height in the commercially zoned areas. This would be from a current allowed maximum of 120 feet to an allowed maximum of 65 feet. There's a picture here of Amazon Corner down on South Hilliard Street. That building is approximately 62 feet. And these buildings are in Walnut Station area and are approximately 65 feet. So this is what it looks like on the ground when a code requirement of 65-foot maximum is in place. All three of the buildings I've just shown you have a ground floor retail component that's a little taller, maybe 15 feet, and then roughly 10-foot residential stories. In this case, 4 floors of residential above 1 floor of commercial. Throughout the life of the project, the height of buildings and the pedestrian experience of a building was a very high priority for community members who participated in surveys, workshops, and neighborhood meetings. Other code amendments that are part of this package include an amendment to the R1 low-density residential zone to allow the display and sale of ag products grown off-site as a permitted use. So this is basically to allow farmers or people growing things on their properties to collectively get together and sell them at one location. And there are some standards that go along with that, similar to our home occupation standards. This has been widely supported throughout the life of the project. There are also some additional community commercial zone design standards, such as window coverings, weather protection, window standards, and building orientation standards. And also in the C2 zone, a proposal to prohibit certain new auto-oriented uses except for the River Avenue area. So I'll show you a list of those uses and a map of that area. The proposal is to prohibit establishing the new uses in this list or expanding existing uses based on community input over the life of the plan. It's important to note that existing uses can stay. So if any of these are in the area already, they can stay, they can be sold, they can continue to operate. And originally, this proposal was intended to transform the corridor over time into a more neighborhood scale, thriving mixed-use corridor, a more walkable district served by frequent transit, biking, and walking. However, we heard from businesses primarily along River Avenue that this would be a problem, and that area has a different character. Let me show you a map. Along River Avenue, there's a mix of commercial and industrial zoning and businesses. And this is across from the Metro wastewater treatment plant and adjacent to Beltline Highway. So the character of this area is really different than the rest of the commercially zoned property up and down River Road, and including the other 2 isolated commercial properties in the neighborhoods. So it made sense to staff, and given the public testimony that we heard, to carve this area out of the code amendments prohibiting certain uses. So the area within the dotted line is not proposed to be included in that prohibition of future business establishment. Staff recommended this option to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission in turn recommended it to you. Backing up to the community process last spring and summer, there were a series of ways for community members to weigh in on the draft adoption package. We held some events that we branded Learn, Discuss, Gather, and Share from May to June of 2023. The feedback was generally consistent with comments received throughout the life of the plan, and that feedback was used to help ARCO, the River Road Community Organization, SACO, the Santa Clara Organization, and the Community Advisory Committee make their own recommendations, which happened in July and August. Those 3 bodies, their full letters are attached to your packet, but in general, their recommendations were to move the plan forward to public hearings, continue to collaborate on implementation with the city, county, and other partners, and to use all of the work that has been collected over 5 years of community input to inform future citywide planning efforts, not lose what we've done. The planning commissions met in November and December. Eugene's Planning Commission deliberated November 14th and December 5th and ended up recommending that you adopt the new neighborhood plan, adopt the Metro Plan amendments. As I mentioned before, keep the 1987 Urban Facilities Plan in place and adopt the new code amendments. The Lane County Planning Commission met later in the month on December 19th, and they also recommended the Metro Plan amendments. And I should note that the county does not have a role in adopting Eugene's land use code amendments. They're only applicable to property within the city limits. And so while they will be a part of your public hearing together with Lane County, only the city will be making a decision on the land use code amendments. Your next steps are staff will be going to the county board next week for a work session. And then you have your joint hearing on March 12th. It's a virtual hearing at 6 p.m. And then you'll meet separately as the city council on April 22nd, and the county board will meet on April 23rd. And now it's time for questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much. That was so much faster and shorter than I thought it would be, given how long the process has been to get us to this point. And I actually really wanted to just take a moment to thank the staff for this packet, because I thought it was really, really interesting, and it was a terrific summation of where you've been and how you got here. So I want to thank you. And I have two counselors. It looks like, I think Mike was up first and then Greg. Nope, Greg was up first. Okay, Greg and then Mike.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor. I'm trying to get myself adjusted here. Couple of questions going to attachment A. Now, I'm a little bit confused, and I need some clarity on this. Are we changing the C2 community commercial zone with? It looks like we've got the height, the limit building height to 65 feet from the current limit is 120 feet. Applied transition setbacks, landscaping, fence. So what are we doing? Are we moving the setback closer? Are we moving it further away? It looks like it's moving setback closer to 65 feet instead of what we normally have as 120 feet. That gives me some pause and concern because of what has happened on West 11th. Can you address that, Terry?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand your question. So the proposal is to change certain standards in the community commercial zone within River Road and Santa Clara. So that's correct, your interpretation of attachment A here. And then I think your question is about what are we doing to the setbacks of the building on River Road, or the front
Correct.
setback is what you're asking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there are some changes to the amount of the building that needs to be within the front setback, but not a change to the setback itself. But I will double check that and make sure that I have that accurate to get back to you on.
Can you get back to me with that? Because I need some clarity around that. Again, one of my concerns is the setback, distance, because that seems to have evaporated in the C2 zone over on West 11th. And that's how we ended up getting the Applebee's practically up against the street over there. And I don't think that we want to repeat the same mistake on River Road that we had on West 11th.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Mike and then Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor and Terry. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for all the hard work of your staff. I know, representing part of Santa Clara, how long this has been in process. I mean, it predates my term on council, some of the work around the neighborhood plan. And I think it's fantastic. I'm entirely in favor of the neighborhood plan and the policy work that has been going on in one iteration or other, frankly, for more than the 5 years, but going back 20 or more years. And I can say that one of the biggest unmet goals of my predecessor, of Gary Pape, was to see the Santa Clara Community Park finally finished, because that was on the 98 bond and the 06 bond and several other things over time. So I just want to say congratulations for seeing that work here approaching, getting going and finishing up. That's fantastic. I do have some concern with the code amendments. Everybody involved in the a lot of the neighbors and a lot of the area residents and those on the involved in land use and frankly some of our own planning commissioners expressed some reservations around some of the code amendments. I'm wondering just if you would characterize from your perspective how the recommended code amendments facilitate the plan. What's the direct nexus? Because there's a lot of people saying there isn't a direct nexus between the code amendments specifically and putting into place the neighborhood plan and the policies.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to be brief, but what I would say is that the plan was originally intended to be implemented by a special area zone, which had a boundary of within roughly a quarter mile of the corridor originally. That shrunk after middle housing was adopted, and it ended up being a pretty confined boundary of special area zone that was mostly around already C2 zoned lots. But the amendments that are now on the table are taken from the draft special area zone that had been developed over a series of years through the workshops and things like that. So it carried forward kind of the top things that had been repeated at the workshops and community events over the years, like the building height and the uses and the design standards.
My understanding too was that was pretty contentious at Planning Commission. Wasn't the vote 4-3?
That was their vote, yes.
That's what I thought. My concern with the code amendments is that we may not, understanding some of the things that may be coming down the road, especially from the state legislature in the next year or two. I'm not sure that's what I would call fully baked yet, that we're ready for those portions. But when it comes to the neighborhood plan itself and the policy statements, I'm entirely in favor. I know there's been a lot of hard work for a long time there, and I just want to congratulate you and your staff on that. Thanks so much. And I'm correct, assuming this goes from here to public hearing. Is that correct?
Correct. The public hearing's on March 12th.
Well, I hope we are going to hear from Planning Commission members, not just a representative of what they did as a body, but some of their members as well, especially the chair and other professionals who work in this area, about some of these code amendments in further detail before we consider them. So thanks.
Hey, thank you. Lindsay and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Terry, and your whole team. I know we can hear probably a collective sigh of relief all down this whole corridor after all these years of work on this plan, and having to pivot so many times with all of the different state codes that have come along, middle housing and CFAC, and all of the different ways that we've had to switch gears a little bit with this plan and how our neighborhood planning process in general is changing because of that. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Mike about the plan being amazing. I'm very much in support of the plan and the policy around that. I also have some concerns with the code and you know, we saw in our memo in our packet that our River Road Community Organization, they're supportive of it as well, but there are some concerns. So I would be more maybe interested in also hearing from folks at the public hearing. And it was brought to my attention that maybe we are looking at bigger sets of code that would be coming up in 2026. And that if there's a possibility of delaying code amendments until all of that, we could kind of do all of that together as a package. Does that make sense in any way, or can you tell me more about what that might look like?
I can explain what the bigger package of code amendments might include. That work is just launching, but you'll hear about it in May in a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. We're calling it Urban Growth Strategies. It's the next look at our land supply and our need for housing over the next 20 years. There's a new set of state laws around housing, and so we'll be looking at ways to accommodate housing and job growth and needs within our urban growth boundary, just like we did in 2017. So there could be code amendments that look at our corridors, or we're just not very far along yet in that work to say what those are going to be. But there will be an opportunity for us to do additional code changes or zoning changes or incentive programs to try to facilitate the kind of development that we need and that is in our vision for the next 20 years. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and that would all be citywide rather than neighborhood specific.
Yes, there is a geographically specific component of that under the CFAC rules. So we will be also required to designate climate-friendly areas as part of that work. And so that'll be coming sooner rather than later before we consider the urban growth boundary itself.
And those codes would supersede or these codes, which one would take precedence, I guess, if we implemented these now, would the ones that we would be looking at later?
That's a great question. And we have been looking at that through the course of developing these code amendments. We thought, well, we're going to be implementing climate-friendly areas. Is there a chance that these projects would conflict? In the case of building height, for example, there are requirements for a climate-friendly area to allow a certain tallness of building. We're not all the way there yet on what we're going to be proposing for climate-friendly areas, but I will say that the proposed reduction in building height to 65 feet is consistent with what's called a secondary climate-friendly area, which requires buildings to be at least 50 feet in height. And so it's been a challenge. We've been looking at whether the projects would conflict. What I would say is that this is a fairly limited set of code amendments that get at the highest priority items in the neighborhood vision and don't appear to conflict, but we don't know what will happen in the future. If it turns out you wanted to do something different, you would have the ability to do that in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think when I read the plan, I see a lot about economic development and supporting businesses and small local business. And the code itself is very impactful, mostly just to businesses. And I think maybe there's some room for more business engagement. I know a lot, especially when the code first came out, I got so many phone calls, and I'm really applaud the staff for pivoting as well on that. That's how the River Avenue carve out kind of came about, in that we're like, oh, well, these businesses are going to be really impacted by this. We should do something to make sure that they're not as impacted. But a lot of those people said, oh, like we didn't really get a lot of engagement. And so just kind of thinking about some of those questions and how they're more impacted by the code than the policy in general. So I will leave it at that. Thank you again so much. I am so appreciative of this process, and all of you. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. I too am impressed with this plan. Awesome process, a heck of a lot of work by a heck of a lot of people over a heck of a lot of time. That's a lot of hecks, but and so congratulations to all those folks and putting this together, and staff for helping facilitate this. Sometimes, Terry, I bet you didn't know it'd be your life's work doing this one plan. It also brings up why these are hard to do and why they're not just proliferating all over the place, because they're extremely labor intensive by people and staff and very expensive. So people shouldn't say, well, we should do that and look at the River Road plan as a model. I don't think that's very realistic for what we're doing. I too have similar concerns with some of the details of the code amendments, and I think we're going to hear about that as we move forward. Following up on Greg's line of questioning, a while back we did the commercial setbacks modification where we flipped the rules and required setbacks except for some exemptions, and to prevent things like the Applebee and other places, the Hayward Inn here on Franklin Boulevard near my house. In my ward. One of the questions I had about that is we did allow some exemptions. Terry, do you know, or anybody know, how many exemptions we've actually granted since we put that in place? The intent was to flip the narrative so that the exception was no setback, with the rule being setbacks.
I don't know the answer to the how many exceptions have we gotten question, but I just flipped to the section in the code amendments. The setbacks are not proposed to change. So in C2 right now, it's 5 to 15. So minimum of 5, maximum of 15. And I can follow up on your other question.
Yeah, if you could follow up on that question, that'd be great. Thank you. That's all I had. Thanks.
Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Terry, and your team for the work on this. And I especially want to give a call out, or a shout out rather, to the neighbors that have been involved with this. I was pulled into this process for fire back when I was a deputy chief. So that would have been back in the 90s. And watched many of these same faces were speaking with passion about this back then. And it is really something to see this come to fruition. I think the plan is fantastic, although I do share some similar concerns as my colleagues about the code piece. And I hope we can really kind of dig into that a little bit more before that actually goes to a vote. And I also just want to say, everybody, all my colleagues that have spoken so far, I agree with what they're saying. I share the concern Councilor Evans raised about the setbacks. And, you know, this is an opportunity to really get it right, and maybe not set a model as what the process will look like in the future, but just some of the outcomes and how we got there, and the robust community input that this protracted process provided for. So anyway, I'm sure there's some really good lessons that we can learn as we move forward with other neighborhoods that we're trying to work on as well. And we have quite a queue. And if we do it the same way in every neighborhood, there'll be several generations of people working on this. And I think we need to continue working at a more streamlined process. And I'm still eager to see what staff come back with more of a generic overlay, so that we can be more efficient in how we process these neighborhood plans, and also how we maintain them, because whatever we build has got to be maintained. So to me, there's a bigger consideration as we move forward in a thoughtful way. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And Mike, looks like you want a second round?
Yeah, just another real quick question for Terry. Thank you, Mayor. Terry, you know, as an overall kind of 30,000 foot vision of our community, there have been a lot of the things that we've done over the last several years specifically that tend to focus on the manner in which our community is going to grow. They're kind of overall narratives, and this council has decided many times on many issues, and certainly the community has spoken through the planning work that's been done. My question is about the way the department views this. It's always been kind of I would call the narrative of the way Eugene will grow is to focus on compact urban development and to focus on travel corridors as the major focus for, especially with regard to housing. We've always kind of focused on major travel corridors. Is this still a major travel corridor from your perspective? I know that, for example, this is the only one that the council made the decision to recommend as the place that would deserve MX. I think the community and the surrounding neighbors have responded to that vote that we once took as the favored place to put a new MX line. And I hope we come up with a new recommendation at some point soon. But from the department's standpoint, is this still a major travel corridor? Is that how it's viewed when looking at this?
Sure. From a land use perspective, we've called it a key corridor ever since the Envision Eugene Community Vision was approved by council in 2012. It's also in the TSP as a major corridor and place to direct investment. So I think that's a fair characterization of it. Yeah. Thank you.
So the way I look at this is I want to do the things that the neighborhood wants. I want to do the things that the Planning Commission recommends that lead to the kind of development that's listed in the plan, the neighborhood plan, and doesn't restrict it in any way to see that stay exactly the same for the next couple of decades to come. So I hope we can find that sweet spot, that center place here after we hear a little bit more from others with regard to the public hearings. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this? Thank you for your presentation and for council comments. I think it'll be interesting to hear at public hearing what some of those concerns are. You think about this corridor as a former highway running through a neighborhood that describes itself as a garden district, and recognize that it's not that easy to find the right balance between those two realities in that neighborhood. So there has been so much work on this. I'm hopeful that we'll as Mike says, find a sweet spot. And so thank you very much for all the work that has gone into this. And we will look forward to the public hearing in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think we are ready for our second item of business, and I'm going to turn that back over to the manager to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor. And before she disconnects, I noted there's one staff member that never turned their camera on, Elena Domingo, who's been doing a ton of work on this project, and somebody that we're all familiar with because she's part of the CMO family. So I just wanted to say thank you to you as well, Elena.
Thanks, Sarah.
Good work. Yeah. So your second topic is an opportunity to talk again about the Lane County Multi-Use Stadium project. And there's sort of two components to this. One is just kind of the context of the conversation, a status update, which I will do. And then if you end up shifting gears to talk about the resolution, Catherine will kind of lead that discussion and question and answer around the resolution. As a reminder, if you do make a vote today to refer this to the ballot, I won't be able under elections law to say very much to you. So I do want to at least provide a little bit of context before we move on. So a couple of important things, especially for folks that are maybe tuning in for the first time. All of us are here right now in this discussion because of Major League Baseball changes and changes to facility requirements, changes to schedules, and a determination by the University of Oregon and the Emeralds that their current location at PK Park wouldn't be able to accommodate that. So the M's have been looking for a long time to find a new home so that they could stay here. Ultimately landed with Lane County, who very, proactively thought that the Lane County Event Center might be a good location. They hired a design and build firm to really start to do conceptual design, costing out, and to understand the feasibility of what it would take to build this project. They also raised transient lodging tax and car rental tax by 2% to potentially fund this project. And that I'm going to show a slide in a minute that was showed before. It's not a presentation. I'm just going to re-show information as I was listening to the River Road Santa Clara conversation, understanding it might be actually helpful to look at that again. So what ended up happening is those estimates came in a lot higher than they expected, and that left a pretty significant funding gap. And I'm just going to show that old slide. Let me see if I can find that. One second. This is what happens when you're not actually going to show that. Let's show this. So this is a slide we showed you last year. This was a slide, this came straight from Lane County. This is a presentation they gave to the board. So this was, these numbers are a little bit dated, but at the time they were predicting about $100 million project to include the livestock facility rebuild. And they had identified $57 million worth of secured funding and still had a gap of $43 million. The secured funding is funding that's potentially available. As you note, there's a small one that the Lane County CRT TLT is contingent on the commissioners actually allocating it towards this project. So that $43 million gap was anticipated, and there's some language in the AIS about how they would fill that, was anticipated to be filled with additional funding from the state, potentially additional funding from the federal government, an ask from the city of Eugene for $15 million, and potentially more funding from the team and the ownership group. I'm going to stop sharing that. So since that time, they have come forward and said that they intend to raise an additional $10 million. If all of that came together, it looks like there's still about a $9 million gap, and you can talk more about that as we get closer to it. But when they came to us and they asked for $15 million, we've been super clear from day one. We just don't have that $15 million available. We don't have it in our reserves. We don't have it in ARPA funds. We just don't have it. And so there's been, a discussion about how could we actually still fill that gap. And the question came up about whether we could or couldn't send it to the voters for potentially the Eugene voters saying, yes, we're willing to do that and to close that gap. So your discussion to this point has asked for three things from the county. You've asked for a commitment from them that they intend to actually fund the construction of the project, that they have a definitive plan to fill the funding gap, and that they've provided a guarantee or a plan for operations and maintenance that doesn't rely on city resources. The county's answers to those questions are included in your packet. I've reached out at least one additional time saying, hey, we're meeting today. Do you have additional information? And none has been provided yet. So with that, I'll just say I feel like I've been pretty consistent in expressing concerns about asking voters to support a project that hasn't been approved yet by the lead agency, especially given our financial condition and the fact that we may be, and we will be, needing the community to support some core services, or we're going to continue to make future reductions. I've also been very consistent in sharing my love for the Emeralds, and I completely understand the challenging situation we're all in trying to solve this together. And with that, I'll just try to answer any questions I can and look forward to your discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. And I see Matt already has a hand up. So, and I'm hoping that we do have potential motions. And so if the conversation leads that way, we can get there. But for now, let's just have a general conversation. And so Matt and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. If you'll indulge me, I do want to make a statement before the conversation evolves and before we potentially float a motion. With your permission, Mayor and colleagues, At previous council meetings, I have talked about occasionally serving as a guest announcer for the Eugene Emeralds, and I understand that my comments may have caused some confusion regarding whether or not I was compensated for my public address PA announcing services. I want to make clear, I have never been on the Emeralds payroll, and though I've provided guest announcing services for the Ems as far back as 2007 at Civic Stadium, I've done so out of my love for the game, not for financial compensation. So while the topic of building a new stadium tugs at my heartstrings, the outcome of these discussions has absolutely no financial impact, benefit, or detrimental, no financial impact, beneficial or detrimental on me or my family. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Alan and then Mike.
Yeah. I love the Ames. I've been to many games, great memories. They've been a long history here. I think they're a great asset to the city. They enhance our quality of life. And I definitely want them to stay. But I'm skeptical that stadiums should be paid for with public monies rather than private dollars. I understand that we publicly fund lots of entertainment venues and infrastructure that enable private entities to prosper, like the Lane Event Center, the Holt Center, parks, a lot of city buildings. But the 90% public, 10% private, and I don't consider the 13 million as part of that. That's just a loan, because that's just deferred prepaid rent, not capital contribution. And I think that wouldn't be my preferred split, but that's a Lane County issue more than it is ours. But so I'm struggling here. I'm kind of willing to let voters decide this, but I worry about putting on the ballot a project that doesn't actually exist yet. A yes/no vote on a bond should be a concrete ask, not an advisory or conditional ask. My problem is that we're putting on the ballot potentially a bond for a project that may not happen. As it stands, there's a big gap with no plan to fund it. Currently the M's ownership put up the $10 million in capital. I think the additional state money is a tough sell, and there's still a big remaining gap. But maybe time can heal that and fill that gap. So I understand the timing issue, but it seems like a bad public policy and bad precedent to put bond votes out that not committed to in certain projects. I guess, what does that mean for future ideas that come up? We're just going to put other things like this on the ballot. I think it's going to be controversial and potentially acrimonious, potentially a lot of effort and turmoil for something that may not happen. That's why I supported the approach that we had before, which was where we had the conditions where we adopted that we were saying that we had a clear message that we stand ready to support the project, and should the voters decide to do that. But we need to know what the plan is to fill the gap. We need to know that the Board of County Commissioners had some certainty and committed funds to the project by designating the TRT funds increase to the stadium, and that an O&M plan was in place so that we wouldn't be on the hook with our general fund, which is severely overburdened general fund, where we're looking at making cuts to libraries and other things in a $10 million deficit, that we wouldn't be on the hook for having to contribute to that, because that's not in the plan. So none of these three things that were what we thought were necessary are in place, and that's very concerning to me.
Alan, you're over. So if you need another round, I can give it to you. Alan? Okay.
Done.
Okay, thank you. I will give you a second round. So Mike, I had you next. Go for it. And then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand Alan's concerns. I think that the plan we had was wise, but this is a subject of pretty wide community conversation. There's a couple of emails we've got about this from a lot of folks who care. And I love the M's as much as anybody, and I love going to the games. So this isn't really about whether or not I love the M's or don't, or whether I think we should have a new place for them to play or not. This is whether or not our community, and frankly, our county, should get together and build a new public facility. And I say public because it's on the county's land and it would be used in many ways. should the community get together and build a new public facility? In my perfect world, we would build a city jail with that much money instead of this particular thing, because I think we need it more. And the manager's right. We certainly have other needs, and I've identified other priorities that we need to fund. That's true. But the basic underlying question is, should the community build a new public facility or not? And I think that's a question for them to answer. That's the fair thing to do. I don't think it's something this council should vote yes or no, to participate financially in that. This is all of us together deciding, do we need this new facility? If it's the M's, that's great. If it's some other baseball team, if it's some other group of activities that take place in that facility, I think it's a decision that belongs with the people to answer. Do they want to, get together and have money taken for this particular use or something else? And so it's a very difficult decision. There certainly are a lot of other priorities that we need to think about. But from my perspective, I for one would be willing to let the community make that decision. So it's probably a 51-49 sort of call for me, but I come down on let the people of Eugene decide. And so if that's the motion that ends up on the table, I'll probably vote to support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Randy and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to start by correcting one thing, Alan, that you said. The 13 million that the M's originally pledged, only 10 million of that's the lease agreement. 3 million is going to the capital, and then the additional 10 million, so it'd be a 13 million. It's still a small piece of the overall pie, and what's really unfortunate is just construction costs the way they are. I'm kind of where Councilor Clark is. I think we've had such an overwhelming response from the community over the past year that it's worthy asking them what they want to do. And an overwhelming number of the people who contact us, it's been in favor of the stadium. And it's really hard for me to overlook that. In fact, I've been spending a fair amount of time responding to constituents who have written on one side or the other, and trying to explain, whether this is an advocacy for, or say, community, you tell us. I mean, it's hard to know whether this is a majority of the community that feels this way, if this is a really strong support base. But I know there's a lot of misinformation that's flying around out there right now, which I think is just complicating this discussion and the issues. This is a county project. This isn't a city project. At the same time, obviously, we've been asked by the county to contribute. One piece, City Manager, I was hoping you would elaborate on is some of the timelines that we have to work with. I mean, if this is going to be on a May ballot, it has to be decided today. At the same time, we could still pull it off. I believe March 13th is the deadline, if you could confirm that. And the other piece that even though this stadium would be doing much more than just serving an anchor tenant, which in this case would be the M's, it's one of those things where the M's are actually on a timeline here, and their problem is not finding a place to land. It's finding a place to land in this community. Communities are vying for a reduced number of teams. Many of them already have stadiums, and that's good for them. But if the M's leave, obviously we've lost an affordable level of entertainment for the public. And yes, we have bigger problems like homelessness and other things, but one of the things I do understand, we need to make sure we have things that reward the people who are here living every day and doing the work that keeps this community going. And it can't just all be for one group of people. I might need a second round. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Emily and then Jennifer.
Mayor, do you want the city attorney to speak to the timelines, or do you want to wait until?
people have gone around.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Why don't we let
Thanks.
her speak to that? Thank you.
Councilor Groves, what you recited as the timelines is accurate. Today is the last day of which the council can pass legislation that refers it, and that's the 90 days before the May election. And then 60 days prior is the deadline for actually submitting the ballot measure to the county, and that's a state and county requirement. And that would be March 21st. Your last meeting before March 21st is March 13th. And so that is why you have that additional motion in your packet, because that would be an opportunity if in fact you had additional information or just wanted to discuss this further. That would be March 13th would be your last meeting where you could prevent it from going to the voters. And in essence, what I would be providing is a motion to repeal your resolution, but it would just stop it. It would stop it before it made it to the voters. And that would be your last opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Emily, and then Jennifer.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's been working so hard on this. It's quite a project. I do want the M's to stay. I think they have a lot of value, and I agree that we do need to take care of our urgent needs and our vital services, and at the same time, think about ways that makes Eugene a wonderful place to live for many people. I'm not a big baseball fan, but I support the people who are. I have a lot of concerns. First off, that we did not get the information we clearly asked the county for. And it's their land, and yet they're not willing to come forth with, yes, we're definitely putting the new taxes into it. And it leaves us in a place where we could be blamed for the failure of the project because we decide not to ask the people if they want to go forward with this. The state hasn't decided, and the county hasn't stepped up for their project. And we don't know. The money, it's probably going to need more by the time it happens. And then what? We're going to put out another bond? Is it just going to all fold at that point? I have concerns about the siding, even though that's been a long, long project to figure out where it might go. I'm not absolutely sure the fairgrounds should stay being the fairgrounds. I still want a fairgrounds, but maybe it doesn't need to be in the middle of the city. And very different than Civic, which was literally up against a wall. It's right in the middle of single-family houses, not very large ones. And it would definitely change the character of the neighborhood. Some people would be excited about it, thrilled to have it. Other people would not be happy. I used to live 3 blocks from the fairgrounds, and when there are events there, it impacts you quite a bit, parking and noise being the biggest, and just more people walking around your neighborhood. It's a big uncovered area. We say it's for multiple use, but how are we going to actually use that? And what's going to happen to the livestock arena? It's a fairgrounds, and I think that's part of our core use of it. So that needs to be taken care of. I'm okay with putting this on the ballot because I think the people should be the ones to decide. But I'm only going to vote for it if we still have the opportunity to pull it in March, because if these questions aren't answered, I don't think we should put it forward to the city population to okay an unknown situation. I'm worried about risking the ask because we're going to have to ask for other needs. And I'm really interested, and I know this is sort of backwards, are we going to write a pro or con statement? Because if we don't keep this neutral for a real vote, then I can't support it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I will just point out in response to that one of your motions would be, if you moved forward, would be around submitting a statement, which is, and the city attorney, if we get to that point, the city attorney can address that as well. Okay, Jennifer and then Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, so ultimately, this decision comes down to credibility for me. The last time we met on this topic, we asked the county for a set of very reasonable pieces of information. much less information than we require for other large allocations of public funds. And since this is not our project, it made sense to request these details for an ask of $15 million. As it stands now, we haven't received the information we asked for. The county has not demonstrated that the project would be sustainable, nor have they green-lighted this project or committed their own funds. And I would never vote to allocate money for a project that wasn't planned out and shown to be viable. So I can't with good conscience vote to ask my fellow taxpayers for their money for a project that doesn't seem to meet these minimum requirements. Not long from now, we're going to be asking our community for more money to fund city services. It might be a fee, it might be a tax, but we are going to be asking taxpayers for more money. And we need them to believe that when we ask for their money, it's for something that matters, something that's viable, and something that has a plan for success. Voting support this bond for a project that has not been fully vetted, that the county commissioners haven't even voted to dedicate their own funds towards, will compromise our credibility in this area. Once the county comes back with the information we have asked for, we would be in a solid position to move forward with an ask. If we're willing to move forward funding for a project that has not been proven to be viable based on emotions rather than acknowledging the lack of data and information before us, how can voters trust us next time? That's my main concern about this entire process, and the reason why it would be very hard for me to support moving forward without the basic information that we asked for.
Okay, thank you. I have Matt, then Lindsay, then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion. I can make a whole host of qualitative and quantitative arguments in favor of the M's, but it boils down of a multi-use facility in our community. It boils down to this. If we build it, the M's will stay. And if we send a signal to our county and our state partners that we're stepping up to the plate and empowering the electorate of the city of Eugene to make a decision this May, then it opens up the potential for that additional $7.5 million of state funding. There's an ask at the state level, it's my understanding, that revolves around the Hillsborough Hops and the Eugene Emeralds. And it remains a county priority, is my understanding. The county, I want to thank for pointing the M's in the direction of the fairgrounds in the first place. And the county took action to adjust the transient lodging tax, as city manager mentioned, 2 percentage points. So thank you to the county, and my fingers are crossed, and I hope that by the time the legislature adjourns on March 10th, we'll know more and then can make that final decision on or before March 13th. The M's are an award-winning organization who have lifted up countless nonprofit organizations in our community. They are a storied organization that goes back to the 1950s. Notably, the M's have been in Eugene longer than the Dodgers have been in Los Angeles. I look forward to presenting a motion that signals to our county and our state partners that this franchise, a long season single A franchise connected to the San Francisco Giants, has a home in Eugene. And we will give our voters a choice based on state funding that could open up and based on all levels of government saying we're all in this proposed public-private partnership. I look forward to making that motion, Mayor, and thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm incredibly conflicted about this decision today. There are a number of reasons why I would absolutely love to support this project, many of which that have been addressed today. For me as a family advocate and someone in the mental health field, I think community gathering spaces, affordable family fun spaces where we can gather together as a community, and especially post-pandemic, and lessening our isolation in our community, making us feel like we're bonded together. These are really important things for me in my position here. I think our community is facing a lot of compassion fatigue, where we're continuously pouring a lot of money into things that don't always affect them, things that aren't necessarily beneficial to them. And I think this is an opportunity for those people to have something fun, to promote, to feel like they're a part of, and to enjoy at the end. It's a fun project. On the other hand, in my pros and cons list, my list of cons is very long as well. This project does not have the level of planning or engagement, neighborhood engagement, needs assessments that I would like to see before moving forward with a project of this size. Is a baseball stadium our highest and best use of county property? Do we need an indoor sports facility more than an outdoor sports facility that is only really viable a few months of the year? Do we need convention centers? Do we need other types of community spaces that will benefit our city in the long term more than this project? Or are we making this decision preemptively because the baseball team has asked us and told us that there is a very specific timeline that we have to make our decision? And the biggest reason of all, we have a huge gap in our budget. In the near term and our long-term future at our city, we are looking at cuts to important services like library, fire, police, if we cannot address this gap in our budget. I'm sitting on the revenue committee to help advise our city manager so she can advise us, the council, on what we're going to do in the future to address this gap. And as Councilor Ye mentioned, we're going to be asking the community, we're going to be asking our city to help us fund that gap, to pay for the needs. So all of that being said, I don't want to be the one to outright kill this project today. I would be willing to look at it one more time on March 13th and see if we are going to really put it forward or repeal it. But if our questions are not answered at that point, I will not be voting for it at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, and I can always give you a second round if you need to come back. Greg.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, yeah, I'm unmuting myself. In terms of full transparency, I'm a baseball guy, okay? Played the game many years ago, 40 plus years ago. My kids have, softball, baseball, all of that. Spent a lot of time on the road, following my children, and has spent a lot of time in Major League Baseball stadiums. Grew up in Cleveland and was part of the reason why I'm here is because of the Cleveland baseball team and my parents dating back in 1948. But the issue that we're facing right now is two-pronged. One is we're facing a deficit in our general fund of about $14 million to $15 million. And we will probably have to go back and ask voters to support either a levy or some other kind of funding measure to close that gap if we're going to maintain the level of services that we currently have. Or we're going to have to cut services to meet that gap. That right now is extremely concerning for me. The second thing, as we talk about this proposal to put it before the voters, is making sure that the numbers are solid. And the ask right now is for 15 million. Will this be the only ask that we're going to have to this council and this community for this project? Is 15 million enough? Are we looking at more money? Originally, this project started out, I believe, in the 43 to 45 million dollar range, and we've gone up to $100 million. The second thing I need to make sure that we are clear about is that this is the county's project, and we would be a contributing factor to making the project move ahead if our voters decide that that's what they want to do in terms of creating a bond and supporting a bond for the project. So I am increasingly concerned about what our financial situation is currently, but I am in favor of letting the voters decide what they want to do with their money.
Okay.
And I'll cut it off there. I'm over time.
All right, thank you. All right, I have two counselors asking for a second round. And Randy, did you want a third round? Yes, second round also. So I have Alan, Jennifer, and then Randy.
Thanks. Just to clarify, the $13 million from the M's, $10 million would be prepaid rent. I consider that a loan, not a contribution of capital. The $3 million for equipment, not for the stadium. Also clarifying that this is not a legislative priority for the county in this session. And it is a county, not a city project. So we don't get to decide whether or not it lives or dies. I did bring up earlier in an email a special election detail. Maybe City Manager, you can talk about that. I'm not advocating for that, but maybe the rules, the cost, the timing.
Probably the rules and timing would be better answered by either the city attorney or recorder. We did reach out to understand what the cost of a citywide special election on like a single item. So it's just City of Eugene only. And I think the cost from the county and a cost to distribute a voter's pamphlet is close to $200,000. And then if Catherine could talk about the timing.
So you as a council can call a special or emergency election at any time. The one parameter being there needs to be at least 90 days from when you call the election to when the election is actually held to allow all the things to take place. And so at any time that is within your authority to do, that is when you would pass the resolution referring it to the voters, and then all the processes would take place. It would just be doing it on a different timeline than the state and county typically does things. But that is well within the council's authority to do it at any time with just the 90-day as your parameters.
Thanks. $200,000 is pretty expensive, but on the scale of things, as a part of 15 million, it's not that big. Problem I have with it is that if they don't come up with a plan within the next 3 months, it's basically the same timing as a November election. So it really doesn't get us anywhere. It just adds cost to it. So I guess what happens in May if there's still no deal and the voters vote for this? What happens to this and we don't pull it on March 13th?
I can speak to that briefly. Twyla Miller, your chief financial officer, is also here if I get it wrong. But the big picture is the bonds just don't get issued. So no, the money is never incurred. The costs are never incurred by the electorate, and it just doesn't move forward.
Anything, Twyla, add to that? No. Yeah, I guess, no harm, no foul, except unless we do a special election, there's $200,000. But I guess the issue of credibility that Jennifer brought up is important in my mind too. If Eugene votes no on this, and we would have the perception that Eugene killed a project that probably is not going to happen anyway, and it's a terrible position to put the city in. And I don't really feel comfortable about that. I agree with the credibility issue that Jennifer brought forward. How does this affect our future ask? We are going to go probably out for an ask. Are we going to eat up our taxpayer appetite for funding basic services. That should loom in all of our minds very, very carefully. And while I am pretty sure that the general fund gap will be part of the ballot campaign, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that conversation will take place. So as of right now, I'm willing to take the next step today to go to March 13th in hopes that we get some more answers in the interim. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, then Randy.
Yeah, so I had a list and Alan hit every single thing on my list. So, so to save us all time, I will say thank you, Councilor Zelenka, for making all of my points and asking my questions for me. I appreciate it.
All right, great. So Randy, then Emily, then Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. What is the difference in cost between a special election and placing this on the ballot for a general election? I mean, I know it's $200,000 to put in a special election, but what is the cost for adding it onto a general election, a ballot that's already going to go out, and a voter's pamphlet that will already be printed?
Thanks, Councilor. Katie LaSala, your city recorder. The city does not get a charge from Lane County elections for primary and general elections when we put items on the ballot. Special elections, we would incur the entire cost, as was already kind of indicated. The voter's pamphlet, typically it's about $30,000 up to a certain size. And that's the piece that we're still kind of following up on. Once it gets too large, we may have to look at the mailing options, the bulk mailing options that we use. So.
Thank you. One clarification I wanted to make. During this last year of all these discussions, I've heard people compare this stadium proposal and baseball games to the Lane County Fair. And there's a very big difference between the volume of people who attend a baseball game, and the stadium capacity is going to be somewhere around 3,500 versus the county fair, which, if my memory serves me correctly, sees in excess of 50,000 people a day and has displays that tie up the entire fairgrounds, as opposed to a baseball game where people could park on the fairgrounds in the parking lot. So I think that's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. I also want to say I agree with what Councilor Semple said, that whatever, if this goes forward, whatever is written up from council should be as neutral as possible. At the same time, that allows individual councilors to take stands on this and advocate for one way or the other. But to me, this is not going to the public asking them for money. It's putting it to the public and saying, what do you want to do? Because we have heard both sides, but quite a bit of that has been from the pro people. So that's something that I still would like to see us do. And I'm ready to vote yes on this today, but I would like to see what we can obtain by March 13th. The questions are being asked, I think, are reasonable. And somehow we've been placed in a position where seems like it's all up to us. And that just doesn't seem right when it's really a county project. I think it's potentially a good county project, especially if the county takes the next step and moves the fairgrounds somewhere else to give that whole site an opportunity for redevelopment and more housing kind of in the center of our community and revitalize an area that sometimes can be a little depressed. So I like the thought of that. That's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily and then Matt. Oh, and the city attorney, did you want to weigh in on something now?
If I could, regarding the proponent statement, Councilor Groves, also Councilor Semple have mentioned this. So I wanted to just give a teeny bit of information of where that's coming from. There's a code provision that requires for a council referred measure, which this would be, it requires at least one councilor that voted in favor of the referral to have the argument in favor of it. And so there is a code provision that prevents you from just being entirely neutral. You'll need to appoint at least one. The motion provides 3 because that's just kind of been your general approach, but at least one counselor would need to be the voice of the referred by the majority of the council.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, Emily and then Matt.
That was my primary question, was do we have to put a statement in there? And I guess we do. And since it sounds like many of us are willing to put it forward with the March drop dead date, I'm just really concerned about that it's, we're asking the people for their opinion, but then we're going to tell them what they think their opinion should be. If we go forward, do we need to start working on that before March?
Katie, I saw pop on. She knows the deadlines for the opposition and the proponent statements. I love that.
Yeah. So, Councillor, the opposition and the proponent statements would be due March 26th. So if council does choose to move forward with this and appoint someone to the proponent committee, they would be getting information from me about serving on that proponent committee pretty quickly. But the deadline to submit would be March 26th. And then rebuttals are due April 5th.
Rebuttals meaning what? From council or from somebody else?
So rebuttals would be if anyone chooses to serve on the opponent committee. So we would advertise for an opponent committee as per your code requirements. Then once the statements are written, pro and con, I provide the opposing party the statements, and then you have 1 week to write a rebuttal to that statement. If no one volunteers to serve on the opponent committee, then it would just be the proponent's argument in the voter's pamphlet, and then any arguments that the public chose to enter into the ballot, or not ballot, sorry, the voter's pamphlet.
So we're not allowed to write a neutral statement. It has to take a position.
That's correct.
That's almost a deal killer for me. I really don't like that. And I'm wondering why the county isn't putting out the bond. It would reach more people, more money. So I don't guess I'll get an answer to that, but it's the same city people that would be voting if it was a county bond and the county people. So those two things kind of put me off. I don't like having to decide so quickly. I mean, I know we've been doing it for a while, but in light of those parameters, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matt, I have you next, and then Mike. I don't know if we're exploring a motion yet, and if you are, I'll have Mike go first. So.
Seeking a point of clarification before I do, Mayor.
Okay, perfect.
There are 3 proposed motions in front of us. If it's agreeable, I was planning on doing all 3 of those separately. And so if Councilor Semple wants to put on the record her objection to that 3rd piece about the statement, those would, without objection, I would like to float those individually and give her that opportunity to have that voice at that time. Is that agreeable?
Yeah, I think that's the expectation, actually.
Right. Right. Okay, great. All right, I defer to Councilor Clark, and we'll make a motion at that point.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I just had a quick question for Catherine. Could you please be more specific with requirements of the proponent statement in statute? Can it be a proponent statement to say we need to know the public's point of view, or is it necessary that we advocate for passage?
I am going to read to you the code provision because some of that nuance isn't entirely addressed. So I'm
of course not.
But the code itself is 2.996 sub B. 1B, and it says the written argument, and this is for council referred measures, which is what we're talking about.
Right?
Written argument in favor of the city measure and the rebuttal to the argument in opposition to the measure shall be submitted by one or more of the city councilors who voted in favor of the motion, except that in the case of city measures referred, then it talks about EWEB. The written argument in opposition to the city measure and the rebuttal to the opposition in support shall be submitted by a 3-person committee chosen in the same manner as provided. So that's all it says.
But it doesn't say that we're advocating for a yes vote. It can be enough to say that we are advocating to know the public's point of view. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll say yes. I mean, it is a argument in favor of the city measure. I mean, that's
what I mean. Specifically, we can say we're advocating to know the public's point of view.
I think so, yes.
Thank you. I share some of Emily's concerns. That's why I'm being so specific. I don't think it becomes, our job to advocate in favor and one way or another. I genuinely want to know, what does the public think? So I think we're fulfilling our duties to say we're advocating for them telling us what they think. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn this over to Matt, I actually want another little point of clarification around if we vote on this today and council passes it, it then becomes an election issue, and then the city manager is constrained in terms of what she can do or what information she has. So the question I have around that is, if the county steps forward with a commitment or a decision not to commit, say, the transient lodging tax funds, that's an information piece that would be shared with us, I mean, within that boundary of what you're constrained to do.
I think, as I understand it, we're pretty cautious with election law, so I wouldn't want to do anything that suggested people go one way or the other. But regardless, whatever you do today, I will send that as a factual update to the county administrator. And if they send back factual information, then I'll provide that to Catherine, who will probably be the lead in any future discussion.
Mm-hmm. And there's always the option that the county communicate to you directly as elected officials. You have none of these election law restraints that staff have.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Council President.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to adopt a resolution calling a city election on May 21st, 2024 for the purpose of referring to the legal electors of the city of Eugene a measure authorizing the issuance of a maximum of $15 million of general obligation bonds to help fund the Lane County Multi-Use Stadium.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion, clarification? Emily.
So this doesn't include whether we're coming back in March. We would approve or disapprove to go forward and then decide whether we come back in March?
There's a second motion, yes, that covers that. And I think Matt has indicated his intention to put that motion on the table.
Correct.
Wow, I really don't want to get caught in approving something and get stuck there. That makes it really hard for me. We can't put them together?
Good.
We could. I would welcome a friendly amendment, Emily.
Can you read
I
all?
would make it friendly that we put them together, because I can't vote for one without the other.
Do I have a second for that? Is there an agreement to do that?
Well, it's friendly.
It's a friendly, but the person who seconded.
This motion hasn't been seconded yet.
The second has to agree to a friendly.
Yeah, and it has been seconded.
Okay.
So I'm looking to Randy.
I'd rather keep them separate, but in the interest of moving this thing forward, I guess I'm trying to understand, what does separating them do that keeping them together, or what does keeping them together do that separating them doesn't do? There's still a motion that we will be voting on, and I assume passing if the first one passes. I guess I'm not understanding what this does different, what this changes.
Emily, do you want to speak to what is your concern here that?
Yes, thank you. If we approve the measure to go forward to ask for a bond, and then we vote not to have another work session, we're done today, regardless of what the county does. So that makes it very hard for me to vote yes, let's do it, without the option to come back with the further information. If I
Council
have to
can decide later
now,
to come back later.
without it, then that changes things.
Okay.
All right.
So you're seconding the friendly, Randy, is that what that?
Yeah, well, I don't like it. I think they should all be kept distinctly separate, but you know, at the same time, I think this thing should pass. So at least we have the option.
Okay,
So just so I have clarity and our city recorders have clarity, with the acceptance of the friendly by the maker and the second, you have on the table the motion to adopt the resolution and move to direct the city manager to schedule a work session on March 13th, 2024 for council to discuss any additional funding or information related to the Lane County multi-use stadium that is unknown at this time. That is now the current motion on the table.
Yep. Yes.
yes. Okay,
Only if Randy agrees.
and Randy has agreed.
I did.
Yeah, Randy has.
I did because
Yeah.
we're just crashing into a wall if we don't.
Okay, Alan and Mike, you each have comments you need before the vote?
Yeah, I was going to ask to read the vote and the motion, the other motions in their entirety. But I guess the flip side of that, Randy, is what difference does it make if it's all one or not all three? It's still council taking action. So the flip side's also true. Why not make people comfortable by allowing it to go forward as a single motion? It likely will pass, but if the other way around, might not.
Okay, and Mike, thank you. Alan and Mike?
My point was similar, but my head count and read of my colleagues was that it was going to pass either way. And we always have the option to bring it up to reconsider at a future point. And you can't bind a council not to consider it at a future point if the council majority wants to. So you could always take it off the table at a point a majority wants to, period. And it didn't have to be part of one vote, but
right.
I'll go either way, whatever everybody wants to do today.
All right, that sounds good. So the combined motions are on the table. We're ready for a vote. All in favor, please.
Can you reread it, please?
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like me to, Mayor?
I think
or
City
Catherine?
Attorney's poised to do
Counselor
that.
Keating, if you have it in front of you, you can read it.
Move to adopt a resolution calling a city election on May 21, 2024 for the purpose of referring to the legal electors of the city of Eugene, a measure authorizing the issuance of a maximum of $15 million of general obligations bonds to help fund the Lane County multi-use stadium, and move to direct the city manager to schedule a work session on March 13, 2024 for council to discuss any additional funding or information related to the Lane County multi-use stadium that is unknown at this time.
Okay, everybody clear on that? All in favor, please raise your hands. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and opposed 1. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. And before you put this next motion on the table, I will just say that I asked Councilor Keating and Councilor Groves if they would take responsibility for writing the statement. There is room for a third counselor if someone wants to raise their hands and volunteer for that role. Otherwise, you can rely on your colleagues. Okay, go ahead and put a motion forward then.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to appoint Councilors Groves and Keating to the Voters Pamphlet Proponent Committee for a Go Bond ballot measure to help fund Lane County multi-use stadium.
I need a second.
Second. Sorry, I was muted.
All right, Mike, you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I don't need a yes or no ability to vote on what my colleagues prepare, but I do hope they take into account the nod towards a neutral position that was discussed today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of those two counselors crafting that statement, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 1. I didn't get up to 8. Alan, did you vote one way or the other?
I voted affirmative.
Oh, sorry. Okay, 7-1. Thank you very much. That passes. Really appreciate all of your hard work. This is clearly a tough conversation. It's not only a tough conversation for us, but clearly a tough conversation for the county that hasn't been able to really have their vote and make their final commitment either. And so I really appreciate the diligence of this body, and thanks for staff support in getting us to this point. And we'll see where we are on March 13th. Thank you so much, and we are adjourned.